Welcome back to PedalBox, where you might not be surprised to hear that a moving part we put on the car doesn't quite fit right. Today we're going to be tidying up some of our bonnet problems. The bonnet opens pretty well, which is nice, but it doesn't close so great. Ever since we put the seal on the duct outlet here, it doesn't quite sit as low as it used to, which, in fairness, not a huge surprise. It sat flush before, we added a seal on top. Weirdly enough, that pushed the bonnet up. The result is now we have to press the bonnet down just a tad more at the back here. There's a little bit of bend in it that we have to put in to hold it down, which is probably nice. It gives it some nice preload once it'll be held down. And we also need to do a little bit of clearancing around the front end of it. So the most important thing that we want to get done today is the bonnet catches. These are going to hold the bonnet down and make sure it doesn't obviously fly up just while we're driving. And to get these installed is pretty simple. We've got the catch itself, which lives in a cutout we're going to make in the bonnet, and it attaches onto a pin that we install in the car. Now the pin's pretty dimensionally sensitive. We've got to make sure this is aligned fairly well because there is a little bit of tolerance in here and there's a little beveled edge that helps kind of guide the pin into place as this closes, but it's not a great deal of slack in there, which means if we start moving the bonnet around after we've put this in, we could end up in a world of trouble. So before we get too excited about putting in our shiny new bonnet catches, we've got to realign the bonnet and make sure that's 100% good. So yeah, first up is potentially quite a tricky one. The sheet metal on this fender here is a little bit proud of the frame that it's attached to, or supposed to be attached to. On the driver's side, everything's pretty good. The sheet metal is flat up against the side of the frame, everything's all toleranced properly, everything's happy. But for some reason on here, it's not quite gone that way. I suspect when we bent it over, where we had it spot welded at these 2 points, the middle of it just sort of tweaked out a bit with the stress. So we're going to try and tap that back in, or if it won't tap back in as it is, we're going to have to cut it a little bit and then tap it then. Well, the first part of today's fixes went really well. It turned out there was a weld that had popped on the sheet metal over there, so we've just pressed it all back into shape, re-welded it, smoothed it back over, popped the bonnet back on, and everything seems fine. So, job's a good one, which means we can move on to slightly more fun stuff, like these bonnet catches. So figuring out exactly where to put these took us a couple of minutes. We started out limited by the shape of the bonnet. You can't put these on a curved panel because they are pretty strong and pretty flat. So we've got two flat areas on the back corners of the hood. We can put it there, or we can put it there. Now, we wanted to put them here originally. We thought it'd be nice and easy because it's quite close to all the supporting structure that we have around this top corner anyway, which would give us all the metal that we need to secure our pins in place. The problem is, once you actually build up the whole stack here, sort of clamp that all together, the attachment point where we go into the body of the car is all the way down here where my left hand is below this rubber bump stop, which means that actually, with all of our frame being just underneath the bonnet, we'd have to build down quite a long way and build kind of a pocket for this to fit into, which isn't really super convenient. It would also make it quite difficult to sort of reach across the car and get both of them from one side. So we thought we'll try and move them inboard a little bit and we'll put them on here instead. Now the frame for this is quite close to the frame for our inner wheel arch, which is quite nice. It makes everything a bit easier to work with. It's also, not so much for me, I am a little bit short, but for someone like Aid, it's quite easy to reach across and hit both releases from one side of the car, so you don't have to like trek all the way around. And it has the bonus point of this is where race cars put them. As with most bits of the car, making sure everything's symmetric and nice and cosmetically appealing is a little bit tricky. It's kind of bitten us more than a few times as we've been going around making sure everything matches from one side to the other, so we're putting a fair bit of effort in here to make sure this all works. The process is a little bit complicated. Annoyingly, we are constrained in where the pins can actually attach into the car body, so we're going to figure out roughly where the pin has to be, then figure out exactly where the catch goes to suit it on the bonnet. Now we have to do this exactly on the bonnet because that's the actual like visually symmetrical part, and then we do have a little bit of freedom on the inside on where exactly the pins end up to make it all work, because we have that much slop underneath angle-wise to figure all of that stuff out. So we're going to start off by figuring out the rough positioning of the pins and the catches on the bonnet, which we've done by marking on the corners of the bonnet itself and the body where the corners of the bonnet sits, and measuring 2 arcs, one from each corner, just to locate both sides. And we've figured out that if we go 22 centimeters in that way and 110 in from that corner, we end up with the keyhole in a fairly good position that the pin underneath will end up easy to attach to the structure in the car. So now under the bonnet, if we take that 110 centimetre mark there and 22 centimetres here, we end up with the two lines intersect at this point right here, which gives us a nice place to attach the pin to the chassis. So now that we know where these have to go in order for the pins to actually work, we can start cutting holes for the catches themselves. Well, this half of the aero-catches are both nicely fitted and the bonnet's back on and everything's looking pretty great. To make it all align, we had to move it a little bit. It turns out that the part of the bonnet that we'd lined it up to before was a little bit curved, and it meant that as we screwed this down, it would be sort of stressing the metal skin by sort of pulling it flat where it doesn't really want to be. So we've shifted them a little bit just to an area that's a little bit flatter. It was still a bit curved, but less than it would have been where we had them set before. So this is on a slightly flatter area, a bit less stress in the bonnet, so the metal's all a bit happier, and we're all looking quite nice here. To make sure they looked right, we cut one hole for this one, which we kind of eyeballed the location of, and then we cut a template around it with the hole that was used in this one, and then we flipped it over and duplicated it the other side to make sure that it matched perfectly from one side of the bonnet to the other with no risk of like measurement error on the body kind of misaligning anything. And if I flip this up now, you'll see that they are nice and well aligned off both corners. Now, although the catches can go anywhere on the bonnet, technically they are constrained by where the pin goes, which obviously we've mentioned a few times, but here's how we actually got the exact alignment for final. We preloaded the rubber bump stop that's on the pin quite heavily, so this is very, very compressed, which means when I pop it into the catch here, it holds itself very, very straight relative to the bonnet. So we've got the nice 90-degree angle that when the bonnet's closing here, it's going to be coming directly onto the pin. It's not going to be on an angle or anything. So on here, we've got a couple of nuts holding the brackets that we made up last night, and these are just a piece of 40 by 3mm flat bar, steel bar, that we've cut the ends off on a slash to match the sort of slope of the chunk of chassis that we're welding them onto. And the bend here is just obviously coming from the upright chassis to where the pin's going to be coming through. So it's a fairly nice, simple little piece of metal. We punched a hole through, locked it all in place on the pin here, which means that now when we close the bonnet, this should be almost perfectly in place to weld onto our chassis. Well, the aero-catches are fully installed. We've got the pins mounted into the body. We've done some calibration on it to make sure all the preload is roughly right and everything's positioned pretty good, which means that now we can release them just like that, pop the pins, and lift the whole bonnet up. And then when we lower it back down again, it lands directly on the pins and closes up just like that. So we'll call that a great success. Well, alongside the bonnet, we've also been working on the roof again at last. A few episodes ago, you saw us commit some horrible, horrible crimes, filling this up with expanding foam and resin and God knows what else, but we've gotten back to it and tidied it up quite a bit now. Unfortunately, the weather's due to turn and I'm running out of time here, so having to seal it up just for the short term so that we can get the cover back on it, which means we've smoothed it off, mostly at least, got some primer on it, just so that it's safe to sit for a few weeks until I next get back here. But it is looking pretty good. The overall shape of the thing's really quite nice. When we open the engine bay cover, it all fits quite reasonably. It's looking pretty great. We do still have a gap kind of down that way between the two, but there's really not much we can do about it. When we bring the cover up, it sort of comes into this area here, so this is probably about as good as it's getting for now. But with a bit more work in the next few weeks, we can probably get this finished up for real and finally move on to some actual paint to really seal it in and make it last a bit better than the one on the front did. Now, we'd like to do something similar in the back with aero-catches. Unfortunately, because of the way the rear end of the car is built, we don't have anything quite as convenient to tie the pins into. This whole rear section here is removable, and it actually kind of comes up that way, which means it's not great to try and anchor something down onto. And we don't really want to use the width of it because that's kind of space that we need for taking the engine and gearbox and everything out. So we've got a bit of head scratching to do, but if we can, we would like to find a way to use something like the aero-catches on this as well, just for the convenience. And if you'd like to help us buy those potential aero-catches or the paint that we're going to start putting on the roof soon, hopefully, jump on patreon.com/PedalBox show. You can support us there from as little as $1 a month. Every penny that we get through there is really, really appreciated. All the money does go into the projects. It does help us keep moving much faster than we otherwise could. You can also jump on shop.pedalbox.show to buy some swanky PedalBox merch like these beanie hats or hoodies, t-shirts, mugs, all sorts of other bits and pieces. And remember, if you are a patron, you do get discount at the store. Well, thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this episode as we've fixed some of our crimes, got our bonnet sorted out. Look forward to seeing you next time. In the meantime, remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Ring the bell because we're knocking out a good few episodes lately. Join us in the comments if you like or dislike how our roof turned out. Personally, I'm quite surprised, so interested to hear what other people have to say. And we'll see you next time.